Okay, in the last video we covered how to build the base shape for the pillar. We kept everything square shaped and put edge loops so that they should retain their shape in zBrush. So let's go load up zBrush now. Alright, in zBrush, when it first loads up, you might see something like this depending on the version that you're in. This is called the Lightbox. We don't necessarily need this, it just takes up a lot of screen space. If you click the Lightbox, it'll turn that off and you have a lot more screen space. So if you need to pull it back, you can pull up Lightbox. Alright, so we need to bring our object in. We've already exported it out as a OBJ file, so we have the bust and the pillar for the two OBJs. Let's go back to ZBrush, and on the right side of the screen we'll see up here where it says import. Load and save as we'll be using later, but those are for the already ZBrush files. We have to import it first because it's not a native file. So we press import, and then let's go check this out on the desktop under the demo. So I'll start with the pillar and press open. That pulls the pillar into our tool list right here. So these are considered tools. So we'll take this guy and I'll drag him on the screen like this, just with the left mouse button, click and drag. And the first thing you want to do is press edit. If you don't press edit and you try and do something, you'll start to create a new shape, and you'll keep creating these new shapes until finally you press the edit button, and once you're in edit mode, now you have a 3D object. Everything else has now been flattened and pasted on the screen. It can't move anymore. You can't interact with it. It's just a drawing at this point. So if you want to clear out your drawings and you made this mistake, to erase out the drawing, just go to Document, New Document. You don't need to save it because it just wants to save a flat image of your screen. We don't need a picture. So we'll click on No, and that clears out the screen. So now I can take the pillar, drag it, and as soon as I let go, the very first thing is click Edit. So now you have a 3D object on your screen and the screen's not cluttered with anything else. For navigation purposes, if you want to rotate the screen, you would click not on the object, but anywhere outside of the object. So if I left click out here, I can spin the screen and look at this from whatever direction. If I want to pan, I hold the Alt key and the same left mouse button outside of the object, and I can pan the screen around. Now zooming is a little more tricky. In order to zoom this program, since it doesn't often use, you don't usually use the mouse for this program, usually you would use a Cintiq or a Wacom tablet to have pressure sensitive pens to draw on the surface. In order for that to work, you would hold the Alt key like you're going to pan, and then hold the left mouse button like you're going to pan, so you essentially are panning, but don't let go of the mouse, let go of the Alt key, and it pops into zoom mode. A little confusing to get used to, but panning again is holding Alt and you can move out here, but as soon as you start moving and let go of Alt, but don't let go of the mouse, you pop into zoom. Otherwise, just left click will rotate the screen. Alright, so now that we have the navigation set up and we have our object on the screen, we also want to pull the pillar in. You don't usually want to import on top of your existing object because sometimes it'll overwrite it. So let's go click on something else we're not using. So I'm going to click on the cylinder and just import on top of this guy. Press import and grab the next one, which is the bust. Press open, and it pops the bust in here. It doesn't erase the pillar. The pillar may not be on the screen, but the pillar is sitting right here, and it didn't erase the cylinder either. That's sitting there as well. So we have the pillar and we have the bust. They're each on the screen at their own time. You don't see them both on the screen at the same time because we exported them as two separate objects. If you imported it as one object, you would see them both on the screen at the same time. But when you start drawing, it'll draw them both at the same time. In order to put two separate objects together, you would do that under Subtools. You click on Subtool and it expands out something that looks like layers. This isn't actually layers. There is a layers tab down here. We're not going to use layers for now. We're just going to use the subtool, which is where you can append these. So I'm going to start with either or, whether it's the bust or the pillar. And down here under the subtool, you'll see the word append. If you click the word append, it pops open this window and it allows you to attach essentially any object that's on the screen. And since we've already imported the bust, if you haven't imported both of these, you won't see it in your menu down here. So import everything you want first, and then you can start attaching things. We're already on the pillar, so let's click on the bust. and that appends and adds, just like it's another layer, the bust to our current object. And since it remembers the grid position in Maya, it'll pop itself right back into place where we left it. So now, this being the brighter red is the active piece, and you can see it has a black bar underneath of it. If I click on the bust, it puts the black bar here, so this is now the active piece and the brighter red color. So as I switch between these, you can see which one is active. And that covers how to do the subtools and attaching your different pieces together. Also, you can turn off the other one, so if I don't want to see the pillar, I can turn that off. And if I jump over here while this one's turned on, it'll automatically it'll show it, or I can turn the pillar on permanent and turn the bust off, or I could click the eyeball here and it turns everything else besides itself on, or everything and itself. So that covers the subtools and how to navigate in ZBrush. The next step is we want to learn how to draw. So if I go to the standard brush, which we're already on here, and I start taking the mouse and just drag across the surface, you can start to see that it starts pulling out the surface a little bit. It doesn't do too much because there's not a lot of polygons on here. If I click the polyframe button, it'll kind of highlight how many polygons we have. So it's helpful to kind of see that, but not necessarily something we need, so I'm going to turn that back off. Alright, so we have this, but if we want to create a smoother line, we can divide this a little bit higher. Right now we're sitting at 450 active points, or kind of like faces. Let's go down to geometry. If I click on geometry, we have the option to divide and add more subdivisions, just like we're smoothing in Maya. I click on divide, and you can see it doubled the count now, or quadrupled, I guess. If I turn polyframe back on, you can see there's a lot more squares than there was before. If I turn that back off and start drawing, you can start to see there's a lot more resolution I can get with this. However, if I wanted to get a smaller resolution line, let's say I go to the draw size and I go something small like 9, and I want to start drawing some super detail, it's not really going to do much because there's not enough polygons to create deformation. So I can push the divisions a little higher. So let's click divide again. Now we're at division level 3. So now when I start drawing, I can start to get a little more precise. If I divide again, we're at 4 and 28,000 active points. So now if I draw, you can start to see the lines a little more showing up. If I divide again, we're at 5, and you can see I'm getting a lot more resolution and clarity. And if I divide one more time, we're now at 500,000 polygons, or active points, and I can draw and actually start writing different letters if I wanted to put something down there or whatever, scribbles. So these are, the more polygons you have, the more resolution you have. I can slide the resolution back down to level 1, but again, at this level, I can't draw anything. It's just, there's not enough polygons to do much. Usually you want to start at a larger level. So if I wanted to put some detail into some things, let's say I slide the resolution up to level 2, and I want to put some bricks in here. If I want to put some holes in the wall, I can use the Alt key. Let's make this a little bigger. By regular left clicking, I can pull upwards. If I want to put a dent, I can hold the Alt key and I can start pushing a hole in the side of the object, so I just dented it inwards. If I want to smooth something, let's say I put a bump up here, but I don't want that, I can hold the Shift key and the left mouse button, and it'll kind of start painting it out. It'll smooth out the detail. And if there's a lot of detail here, I can kind of smooth it out with Shift as well, and then kind of hold Alt and push it back down again, and Shift to smooth it. But as you can see, it starts to kind of retain that harder edge that we have in there. But we can eventually get rid of that if we keep pushing and smoothing out stuff, and picking a different tool like flatten usually works pretty well. Anyway, so that creates a dent. If I wanted to put some bricks on here, I can start putting some bricks on here, kind of put some, start with the basic shapes and then slide your divisions up a little more. You can start getting a little more blocky in shape. And I can hold Alt and kind of cut some more brick lines in there, so I have kind of like the rocks stacked on each other to create that pillar, depending on whatever shape you're going for. There's other shapes you can pick as well. So if I click on standard, there's a whole bunch of different shapes. Tools like I like the layers, kind of neat. Let's put the subdivisions up a little higher. And with the layer tool, let's pick a different side. It draws a nice layer, and it doesn't draw any higher than that. But if you stop and start again, it'll draw a new layer over the last one. And if I start again, it'll draw the newest layer up there, but it'll stay on its own layer. So it's kind of an interesting little tool. There's lots of little interesting ones elsewhere around here. There's the Move tool. And if you press the alphabetical letters on your keyboard, M, it narrows it down to all the different M's. I can go to Move. Let's say I make the brush size a little bigger over here. And now I can take a whole section and just kind of pull that out. So that's Move, and you can kind of move things around that way. There's other tools such as, let's just say, Magnify. So M, Magnify. If I draw over top of it, you can see it bulges it out, so that's the Magnify. There's lots of different ones you can play with to kind of sculpt with and kind of get your general shape. And you can keep sliding these subdivisions up higher and higher until you get to something that can sculpt some details in there. There's also other options, let's say Alpha. I could put a color spray on here, and color spray will allow me to spray little details on there, but it's kind of a large clumpiness. Control Z is your undo. If I put an alpha on there, so I have color spray, and I add another spray pattern, so double up the sprays, you can see that it starts spraying a lot of little polygons. And since I'm at 500,000, I can start to get a lot of little detail in there. Let's put it some more down there. If I drop the draw size when I do that and spray again, I can get little patches of detail to kind of like put some rock texture on here if I want. Different ideas to play around with. So there's lots of different tools you can experiment with, different alpha channels. I could take, let's say, an arrow if I want, and I can draw with the arrow. It doesn't quite make a lot of sense. But I can also change the spray pattern to draw a rectangle. And as I draw this rectangle, I'm drawing this shape that I picked here on the object, and it's popping it out of there. If I pick the different alpha, I can pick, let's say, this interesting pattern here, draw this one out. The farther I go, the more it envelops, smaller, and you get this shape that popped out of the surface. So there's lots of different fancy tools you can play with in zBrush. And if I want to switch out to the next one, let's go back to freehand and turn that off. So now I'm in standard mode again. I can switch out to the Subtools and jump over to the bust. And now I can start sculpting the bust. And whatever I sculpt here doesn't affect the pillar because they're two separate objects. So let's Control Z that back off. And if I wanted to sculpt something on the face, let's go back down to Geometry and divide it. Divide. Let's divide it one more time. Zoom in, kind of push down the eye area. And if you want to have something more symmetrical, let's Control Z that. Over here we have Transform. Active Symmetry, I can turn that on. By default it's set to X. So if I start drawing, you can see that it will start creating the symmetry on the other side. If I were to go over here and turn Z on as well, and look over here, if I draw something here, it also draws it on the back side, but in this case, it's not drawing on the back because it's not centered symmetrically perfect. This side should be, so whatever I draw here starts to appear here. And if I did the same on the pillar, you would see it in all the different directions. So you can have multiple symmetries on at the same time. Y is going to be the vertical, so whatever I draw up here will symmetrically appear down below. But again, it's not symmetrically built on the Y, so it's not going to match that way. So let's go turn the Y back off and the Z back off. I'll start with X, and I can pull up some eyebrows. I can pop a nose in there, and then kind of push down for the mouth. You can start to create your different shapes by sculpting around. Let's try that again. Okay, so a little bit of a face, and start putting some ears on the guy. So something like that, and that should cover how to start building your basic objects. When you're ready to export, let me load up a different tool to kind of show you something further along in the process. Let's go to Load Tool. It shouldn't matter if you're already on an existing tool. You can see there's two subtools in this tool, and you don't need the other ones. Let me save this to show you how to save first. So when you're ready to save, we're going to go to Save As. When you save your Z tool that has two subtools attached to it, it's going to be called a ZTL, and I'm going to call this pillar in the right folder, and save, and that saves your Z tool. You don't need to save these, the other one, the bust, because it's just the bust by sub, nothing changed. The one that's combined is the one we're going to be using and keeping. So I'm going to keep this one. This one's just an extra import we use to append. We don't need to save this one. If you go over to save a ZPR, it's over here in the other menu. It'll save everything in this menu. You don't need everything. You just need to keep the one tool that you're working on, which is this guy. Alright, so that saves everything there. Let me load up the other one. Now that we've saved a Z tool, we can load a Z tool. That's that Z tool. Let's pull up, I think I can just double click from the other folder. This one. Alright, so this is another project I've worked on. You see it popped into here. So these are my active tools. If I zoom in on this guy, you can see there's a lot more sculptural detail, and the rock is here. Since I'm currently selected on the base, I can slide the subdivision level down something lower. The lowest I have it at is around 5,000. If I slide it back up, the highest it goes up to 378,000. You can see it kind of has some rocks and stone all stacked together. I have a little vine right here. If I pull up the subtools, you can see there's also, I guess, a base plate. I'm not sure why I needed that. But I got the guy up here as well. This guy is just about 1 million polygons. I can step him down through the subdivisions as well. If I go to geometry, you can see that as he drops down a subdivision level, he starts to lose detail. This is the base mesh of the guy, around 3,000 polygons. What we want to do now, assuming this is finished and we're ready to go, and we're going to be happy with this guy, we want to export him. We want to export him in a way that Maya can handle him. At 1 million polygons, that's more than you're going to need to put into Maya. What we need is 2 copies. We're going to need a low resolution to put in the game and a high resolution to generate the neural maps from. This at 1 million polygons is too high for a game resolution object, and probably too high to bother with Maya having it as a neural map object. So we're going to reduce the polygons down a little bit. To do this, we want to keep the same resolution of detail, and most importantly, we want to make sure we have the outer silhouette. The outer shapes of the character is the most important part to keep in mind. All the detail we see front on, straight on from the camera, all this stuff, the neural map can carry for us, but anything that we see from an angle, like the hair, how it does some different waves up and down, the neural map can't show outer detail. It can only show front-on detail, so that's fine. You just want to make sure that everything you see from a contour silhouette perspective will keep its detail. So let's go export this now. Let's go to Z Plugins right here and Decimation Master. And let's slide this back up here. If you don't want to have to keep pulling up that menu every time, you can rip the menu off by going to the circle right here and drag it into this menu, and it rips it out of here and sticks it in the sidebar, so now I don't have to keep pulling up this menu every time. Now the most important thing before you do anything with decimation is to save your object. I don't need to save it, I just opened it. But once you start decimating, don't save it. It'll destroy your model. So once you're done, it's saved, then you can decimate, destroy your model, export, and close without saving. You don't want to save after you decimate. It's going to really mess up your model. But it's going to be okay for the game res, but not to keep working in ZBrush. Alright, so once we're ready and we're happy with this, we have to do this for each of the different objects. So right now I'm going to start with the subtool being open with the bust. Let's go click on Pre-Process Current. And this might take about 10 seconds, maybe longer, depending on the speed of your computer. It's processing up here in the top bar. And what it's doing is calculating every possibility that we could have in the decimation calculations. So once that's done, looks like it just finished. We're going to go click on some settings. So right now this guy is sitting at a full 100%. If I zoom in really close, you can see there's a lot of detail on the guy. If I click and let's say type in 10, and most importantly press enter when you're done, or else the sliders won't change. So I press enter, as you can see the sliders all changed. So if you type a number in, make sure you press enter afterwards, or else it won't change anything. So I want this guy to be 10% of what he originally is right now, near 1 million. I press decimate current, and if you don't see any changes, Great, awesome. He's actually under 100,000 now. So we've knocked off over 800,000 polygons, and he still looks pretty close to what he did before. If you look super closely, you can kind of see he has some triangles in some areas, and you can still sculpt if you want to, but you don't want to have these triangles when sculpting a ZBrush because you just lost all your subdivisions. You can't slide up and down anymore. That's why you don't want to save. It messes up the topology. But now we have a nice low resolution object, or not low, but this will work well enough for Maya. You can put 100,000 in Maya, no problem. It'll work really well. You could try and go higher. You could push this to 20%, decimate current. And so here's what it looks like at 186,000. That's probably more than we need. So I'm not seeing too much difference between the two. So I'll leave him at 10%. He looks pretty decent. What's happening is that it's turning everything to triangles instead of squares and putting fewer triangles in flat areas and more triangles in areas that need more detail. So it's automatically calculating that for us, which is pretty neat. Alright, this is going to be our high resolution. So I'm going to go back down to here. Don't press Save As. Go to Export. And we're going to call this Bust HR for high res or high resolution. So Bust high res, save, and this will help us have a ZBrush looking object in Maya with as few polygons but still keep the same shape. You could try and put 1,000,000 polygons in there if you want, but it's just easier to keep a similar looking shape and not as many polygons. Now for the game resolution. So for game resolution, depending on the console or the hardware, the PC or graphics card you're aiming for, you can kind of figure out what you need to aim at. Right now it's sitting at 186,000 polys. So I'm going to click this and set this to, let's say, 1,000, so 1K. Press enter. What does 1K polys look like? Decimate current. Boom. This is 1,000 polys. It should work pretty well, but not well enough for what we're aiming for. You can see here that the silhouette is the most important thing we want to keep. It's generally holding the shape, but his nose still kind of looks a little blocky. You can see his head looks a little blocky. You can see all the hard edges. So let's maybe go a little bit higher. You want to find that kind of magic number where it doesn't look like it's changing too much. So 2K, enter, decimate current, and you can see it adds a lot more resolution in here. The hair has a lot of detail, the ear, you can see the contours. The nose looks a lot more form-fitting. The head has a smoother contour to it, and so we can keep pushing a little bit higher. If you're aiming PS4, you might have 30,000 polygons in your character. If you're aiming for like PS3, PS2, you would just keep dropping your polys, so maybe 1,000. It all depends on how often you're going to see this guy. If he's going to be a main hero object in the middle of the room, you probably want to have a lot of detail. But if it's going to be something on this corner off to the side, the gamer is going to run past and not even notice, and you probably want to keep as few polygons as possible because it's not as important. If I try, let's say, I'll jump to 4K, enter, decimate current, you can see that he has a lot more resolution. There's a lot smoother transition, but the difference between, let's say, 4K and 2K, decimate current, there's not too much difference on the silhouette, so that's all that we need. We don't need to worry about the frontal details. The normal map will automatically generate that for us. So we just have to be happy with a certain number. Let's try 3K, see what we get. Decimate current. That's probably round enough. So 3,000 polys on this guy is a lot of polys depending on the console or whatever you're aiming for, but it gives us a really nice contour. So I'll leave it with 3K. So when we're happy with that, we'll export again. We'll call this Bust LR for low resolution. So we have a high resolution and a low resolution of the bust. Save that, and let's repeat this process. Let's go down to the subtool, click on the pillar, and let's repeat. We have to go up to pre-process again because we're now on a new object. It's recalculating all the different possibilities of changing those numbers back and forth. Once we're happy with that, we can pick a number. Let's say 10% of what it currently is. Enter. Decimate current. Boom. So this is 37,000. There's kind of a few triangles in there. If you want to have a little more clarity, let's try 20% decimate current. So that's 20%. I think it looks pretty decent. It still holds a lot of the detail, but you can always go up higher. This is sitting at, it says 75, but it's actually going to be 150,000 polys. 150 should be okay in Maya, so I'll call it good enough. Export, call this pillar high res, save, and one more. Let's say I want that the head was 3000. Let's see if I can get away with 2000. 2K, decimate current, and that's kind of what we're getting here. That's probably good enough. I could try and drop lower, let's say 1K, decimate current. It starts to get a bit more blocky, but it might work at that rate. I'll try 2K, decimate current. Alright, so that keeps a lot of clarity. Again, if this is going to be a close-up object character is going to run to, then you might want to have this detail. But if you're going to be far away and you're never going to notice this, you could try 0.5 and decimate current. So something like this, that could work also. It all depends on what level of detail you're looking for. Let's try 2K again, decimate current. I'll keep it at 2K, I guess. So altogether I have a 5K object. Let's go to export selected. And this is going to be pillar, low res, enter, saved. So now I have my two low res objects. If I have more subtools like Divine, I would keep repeating this process until I have something that looks like it would work pretty well, and we'll do the rest in Maya for creating the maps. One more thing, if you hold the shift key while rotating, it'll click your object in place. This way it kind of lines the screen so you can kind of pop it into whatever position you're looking for. Alright, and that should cover most of zBrush. You can do, there's a lot more features in zBrush, but for now, just focus on sculpting and exporting your object back out.